History is being made, and not in the way anyone expected. For the first time ever, a U.S. president-elect is entering office with a criminal conviction hanging over his head. Donald Trump, found guilty on 34 counts, is walking a tightrope between the courtroom and the Oval Office, rewriting the rules of American politics as we know it. But what does it mean for the country when the leader of the free world starts his presidency under such a cloud of controversy? Can Trump navigate the weight of his conviction while delivering on his promises? Or will this legal battle define his term before it even begins? Let's dive into this unprecedented moment in U.S. history. In the 234-year history of American democracy, we've never seen anything quite like this. A former president convicted of a felony while running to retake the White House.
You know what's fascinating about this moment? It's not just the conviction itself, but how we got here through what seemed like a relatively minor case about business records.
Well, let's break this down because the details are pretty remarkable. We're talking about 34 counts of falsifying business records, all stemming from a $130,000 payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels before the 2016 election.
And what's interesting is that the payment itself wasn't necessarily the illegal part, right?
Exactly. So it was the cover-up. The way Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, made this payment and how it was recorded in business documents. You know, it's kind of like that old saying about it's not the crime, it's the cover-up.
So what makes this sentencing particularly unique is that while falsifying business records could mean up to 4 years in prison, Judge Merchan went with something completely different.
Right, what's called an unconditional discharge. No jail time, no fines, no parole requirements. But here's the crucial part. Trump becomes the first person convicted of a felony who might assume the presidency.
Well, that really raises some fascinating constitutional questions, doesn't it? The founders never explicitly addressed whether someone under felony conviction could serve as president.
And that's just one piece of this incredibly complex legal puzzle. Like we've got these federal cases about classified documents and trying to overturn the 2020 election that are essentially on hold because of Justice Department policy.
Oh, you mean the policy against prosecuting a sitting president? That creates such an interesting paradox.
Exactly. Some cases are paused because he might become president again, while this one resulted in a conviction. And then there's the Georgia case about election interference that hit that roadblock when prosecutor Fani Willis was disqualified.
Let's not forget about those civil cases either, particularly the E. Jean Carroll defamation suits that resulted in that massive $88.4 million judgment.
You know what's really striking about all this? Despite these unprecedented legal challenges, Trump remains a frontrunner for the Republican nomination. It really shows how our political landscape has shifted.
That makes me wonder about the practical implications of this conviction. Does the symbolic weight matter more than the actual punishment?
Well, consider this. While there are no practical restrictions placed on Trump, this conviction becomes part of American presidential history forever. It can't be erased or pardoned away, even if he becomes president again.
The whole situation really challenges our traditional understanding of presidential accountability, doesn't it?
And here's another layer to consider. Trump's legal team tried everything to prevent this sentencing, including a last-minute appeal to the Supreme Court. But unlike some of his other cases, this one pushed through to completion.
Though with Trump's planned appeal, we're far from the end of this story.
Looking ahead, this case might make future politicians more cautious about their business dealings and record-keeping, but it also sets a precedent that being a presidential candidate doesn't make you immune from prosecution.
So what do you think this means for the future of American democracy?
Well, we're essentially writing new chapters in constitutional law as we go along. This conviction, whether it stands or falls on appeal, has fundamentally changed how we think about presidential accountability and the reach of the justice system.
It really makes you wonder what future historians will make of this period.
Until those history books are written, we'll keep watching these unprecedented developments unfold. While the courtroom drama surrounding Trump's conviction has captivated the nation, the story doesn't end there. In fact, it's just the beginning. As the first convicted president-elect in U.S. history, Trump now faces an unprecedented challenge, leading the country while carrying the weight of a criminal record. But how does this verdict impact his ability to govern? And what does it mean for his incoming administration? The transition of power has never been more complex or controversial. Let's delve into how Trump's legal battles intertwine with his political ambitions and what it all means for America moving forward. What happens when a president-elect enters the White House with a criminal conviction? For the first time in American history, we're about to find out.
The sheer magnitude of this situation is mind-blowing. A sitting president appealing a criminal conviction while running the country.
You know what's fascinating? Judge Merchan had to essentially create new legal precedent here. He chose this unconditional discharge. No jail, no probation, but the conviction stays on Trump's permanent record.
That's such a delicate balance. How do you maintain the integrity of the justice system while acknowledging the practical reality of presidential powers?
Well, let's look at the judge's exact words. He said that while presidential protections are extraordinarily broad, they do not reduce the seriousness of a crime or justify its commission in any way.
And yet, this whole case started with a relatively modest $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels.
That's exactly what makes this so interesting. What began as a case about falsifying business records transformed into this historic test of presidential power and accountability.
The political fallout has been fascinating too. Those campaign contributions actually jumped by 300% after his initial indictment.
Right, but then something unexpected happened. After the guilty verdict, polling showed his support among Republicans dropped by nearly 15 percentage points. Though honestly, that story got buried under everything else.
Oh, you mean like Biden's debate disaster and that shocking assassination attempt where the bullet missed Trump by just inches?
And don't forget the timing of all this. Judge Merchan deliberately pushed back the sentencing multiple times, explicitly stating in September that he wanted to avoid any appearance of influencing the election.
The way Trump handled the trial itself was pretty remarkable. That $10,000 fine for violating the gag order, calling the judge a radical partisan on social media.
You know what's particularly striking? This case made it to trial while those arguably more serious federal cases had to stop because of DOJ policy. Like, the classified documents case and the January 6 charges.
So, what happens now with the appeal process? I mean, we're in completely uncharted territory.
Well, legal experts estimate the appeal could take 2 to 3 years, potentially his entire term in office. And here's the kicker. The appeals court will have to figure out how to handle a case where the defendant is literally the head of the executive branch.
The implications for international relations must be enormous.
Absolutely massive. Think about it. Every time he meets with foreign leaders, conducts diplomatic negotiations, or makes executive decisions, there's this unprecedented cloud hanging over his authority.
The historical significance is just staggering when you think about it.
And here's something we haven't even touched on. This conviction involves 34 separate counts. That's not just one isolated incident. It's a pattern of behavior that the jury found criminal.
The complexity of managing all these legal proceedings while potentially running the country seems almost impossible.
You know what really gets me? The way this challenges our fundamental assumptions about democracy and justice. Like, can someone effectively govern while actively appealing a criminal conviction?
The Founding Fathers certainly never imagined this scenario.
Looking ahead, we're going to see some fascinating developments. The appeals process, potential Supreme Court involvement, international reactions. This story is far from over.
Something tells me we'll be discussing this for years to come.
Well, if there's one thing we can say for certain, it's that January 20th won't just mark another presidential inauguration. It'll mark the beginning of a completely new chapter in American political and legal history.